The market square buzzed with the hurried clamor of vendors, the incessant jingle of pocket watches, the rhythmic ticking of time, and the creaking of old wooden carts. A light mist hung in the air, carrying the smell of burning incense and something faintly metallic. People moved like ants, scurrying between stalls, bargaining for their lives, if not literally, then certainly metaphorically. Time was the currency of this market, and its value fluctuated as wildly as the stock prices on Wall Street. At the heart of this peculiar bazaar stood a small, crooked stall, its sign hanging limply from one side. The faded letters on it read simply, "Time for sale." The stall's owner, a man known only as the time merchant, stood behind the counter, his fingers stained by the countless watches, clocks, and sundials he had handled over the years. His eyes were weary, but sharp, scanning the bustling crowds. He was an unremarkable figure, a thin, slightly hunched man with a graying beard and a face that looked like it had seen far more than it cared to remember. He was dressed in a weathered leather coat, the kind that looked as though it had survived 100 storms. The time merchant wasn't interested in trading mere seconds or minutes. He sold more elusive things, moments, memories, fragments of future possibilities. To most, it seemed impossible, an absurdity. But to those who knew the market's darker secrets, it was a goldmine. He wasn't a crook, though, far from it. He simply dealt in time the way others might deal in precious metals. It was a commodity, a rare one, and his specialty was making the impossible happen. If you had enough to trade, you could buy back a lost hour, see a glimpse of your future, or even exchange a painful memory for something more pleasant. But as with all things valuable, there was a catch. The price was always high. The time merchant leaned against his stall, absent-mindedly watching the crowd, when a voice broke his reverie. "I hear you can offer more than just minutes and days." He turned to find the source of the voice, and his eyes landed on an old man standing before him. The stranger was tall, though his posture was bent with age, his hair long and white like a faded sheet of parchment. His skin was leathery and deeply wrinkled, and his eyes glimmered with an intensity that seemed out of place on someone so frail. For a moment, the time merchant didn't know what to make of the man. His presence was unsettling, an anomaly in the otherwise predictable flow of the marketplace. This wasn't the typical type of customer he dealt with. Most people were too afraid to come close to his stall, unsure whether they were ready to gamble with time itself. The old man smiled faintly, as though reading the time merchant's thoughts. "I seek something more profound. A journey, not of seconds or hours, but of something greater. I seek the bridge of eternity." The time merchant blinked in surprise. The bridge of eternity was nothing more than a myth, an old folktale that had floated around for centuries. The story said it was a bridge that connected the beginning and the end of time itself, stretching across the ages, where one could walk from the birth of time to its eventual death. Most dismissed it as fantasy, a bedtime story for the weary or the insane. But this man, he seemed different. He wasn't spouting nonsense. There was a strange gravity to his words. "The bridge of eternity doesn't exist," the time merchant said, shaking his head. "It's a legend. A story told by those too afraid to face the truth. Time isn't some linear path you can walk across like a bridge. It's a web, a maze, a flow. And no one can step outside of it. Not even me." The old man's smile widened, his eyes glinting. "You're wrong, time merchant. It exists, and I've found the way. But I cannot walk it alone." A silence fell between them. The bustling of the market seemed to quiet, the air thickening with an unspoken tension. The time merchant studied the old man, sizing him up. There was something in his voice, something compelling, something ancient. "You're serious," the time merchant murmured, half to himself. The old man nodded. "I've walked through time, seen the birth of kingdoms, the rise and fall of empires. But time itself is a prison, and I need your help to escape it. Together, we can cross the bridge of eternity." The time merchant hesitated. His entire life had been spent working within the confines of time, manipulating it in ways others couldn't fathom. But this was something new. Something that spoke to a deeper, more fundamental truth about the very nature of existence. What's in it for me? The time merchant asked. Finally, the old man chuckled, his voice soft but filled with knowing. What if I told you that you've been living the same life over and over? What if I told you that your fate, our fate, is intertwined in ways you can't yet understand? We're bound by time, yes, but we can break free. The time merchant raised an eyebrow. Sounds like madness. It's not madness. It's the truth. I've seen it. And if you join me, you'll see it too. Time isn't a straight line. It loops. It folds. It spirals in on itself. And the bridge, it connects it all. The beginning. The end. And everything in between. The time merchant stared at the old man for a long moment, the weight of his words settling like dust in the air. Could it be true? Could there really be a way to escape time? Or was this just another fool's errand? But something in him stirred, a curiosity, an urge to discover what lay beyond the world he had known for so long. You really think you can show me the bridge of eternity? He asked, his voice low. The old man smiled again. I know I can. And together, we'll walk it. But only if you're willing to trust me. There was a long pause as the time merchant weighed the offer. He had lived a life filled with bargains, with deals struck in the shadows, but this was different. It was a journey, not just through space, but through time itself. And part of him knew, deep down, that he couldn't walk away. All right, he said, finally. I'll go with you. But this better not be some elaborate trick. The old man nodded, his eyes gleaming with something more than just excitement, perhaps something older, something wiser. It's not a trick. But you must understand, once we cross that bridge, there's no going back. We will see things that will change everything. About you. About me. About time itself. And so, with a mixture of skepticism and intrigue, the time merchant agreed to embark on a journey that would alter the course of his life forever. They began walking side by side, the crowd parting around them without a glance, as if they were just another strange, unnoticed pair in the strange world of the market. The old man's presence was unnerving, yet magnetic, and the time merchant found himself unable to look away, as if the gravity of his words had somehow anchored him. They moved slowly, deliberately, the noise of the marketplace fading behind them as they exited the square. Outside the market, the air felt thinner, less solid. It was as if the passage of time itself grew thinner the further they walked. The old man, whose face was carved by centuries, never looked back, never stumbled, his pace steady and unwavering. I assume you've heard the stories, the old man said suddenly, his voice low, about the bridge of eternity. The time merchant grunted in acknowledgement. Heard the stories, sure. The ones about the eternal crossing between time's beginning and its end. No one believes them anymore. Except you, the old man replied, his eyes glinting with a quiet amusement. You've seen things in your line of work. Time has a way of revealing itself to those who look closely enough. The time merchant snorted. I'm no mystic. I just know how to trade in it. He hesitated for a moment, then added, but you're not wrong. I've seen things. Things that don't make sense. The old man nodded, though it was unclear whether he understood or simply agreed. Time is more than what we feel on the surface. It's a network, a web, like you said. But it's more fragile than you think. More connected than you realize. You said something earlier, the time merchant continued, his voice roughening with curiosity. That we're bound by time. That we've crossed paths before. The old man smiled slightly, but his gaze remained distant. Everything is connected, every moment. Like threads woven into a tapestry. Only when you step back, when you see the whole picture, can you understand the design. For the first time, the time merchant felt a shiver of unease. He had always believed that time could be controlled, measured, manipulated. But the more the old man spoke, the more he felt as though he was part of something much larger, something he had never even dreamed of. And the weight of that realization was beginning to press down on him. They walked on for hours, the world around them shifting in strange ways. The air grew colder, though the sky above remained clear. No clouds, no storms. Just an endless stretch of stars that seemed to hang motionless, as though suspended by some force outside of time. Finally, as they walked through a dense forest of ancient trees, their gnarled branches twisted into unnatural shapes, the old man spoke again. "Do you understand why time feels wrong to you, merchant?" The time merchant frowned, glancing at the old man. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Time doesn't move in straight lines," the old man said softly. "We've been trained to believe it does, to believe that our lives are linear, a sequence of events that begins and ends. But time, in its true form, bends. It folds. It loops back on itself, sometimes in ways we don't even realize. That's why your work, as valuable as it is, never truly satisfies. You're trying to fix a problem that can't be fixed with your methods. You can only manipulate the surface. The core of it is, well, it's beyond what we can control." The time merchant looked at him in silence for a moment, considering the words. "So, what are you saying? That there's some greater force at play? That time is some living thing?" The old man chuckled, a low sound that felt more like the wind rustling through the trees than anything human. "Not a living thing, per se. But it is a force, yes. It's the fabric of everything. And the bridge of eternity, it's the only place where you can truly step outside of it. See it for what it is." The merchant's mind raced, trying to comprehend what the old man was saying. He had always understood time to be something to be controlled, bought and sold. But now, the very foundation of that belief seemed to be crumbling before him. "And what happens if we cross this bridge?" The old man's eyes softened. "We'll see the beginning and the end. Not just of time, but of us. Of everything." That was when the bridge appeared. At first, it was just a faint shimmer in the air, a distortion in the landscape, as if something deep in the earth was stirring. And then, it materialized fully before them, an ancient stone archway that stretched high into the sky. It was like no bridge the time merchant had ever seen. There were no railings, no support beams. Just a path of ancient stone, stretching forward, disappearing into the mist. The air around it felt different, as though the rules of reality were bending at its edges. The trees on either side of the bridge appeared to grow in reverse, their leaves twisting up from the roots and floating toward the sky. The time merchant stood frozen in place, his heart thundering in his chest. "This is it." The old man nodded. "This is the moment, merchant. The moment where everything changes." They stepped onto the bridge. The sensation was immediate. It was as though the ground beneath them had disappeared, and the bridge itself was more of a thought than a physical structure. Time seemed to unravel, twisting and warping. As they walked, the world around them shifted. One moment, they were surrounded by the ruins of an ancient city. The next, they were standing on a desolate plain, watching a civilization rise from the ground like smoke. But it wasn't just the world around them that changed. The time merchant felt something stirring within him, something deeper than his usual weariness, deeper than any memory. It was as though the bridge was pulling at his very soul. He looked at the old man, whose expression had become serene, almost expectant. "What's happening?" the time merchant asked, his voice tinged with fear. "We're seeing the beginning," the old man replied softly. "The beginning of time itself." And in that moment, the world before them began to split open. They stood at the dawn of creation, an empty, infinite void. And yet, within that emptiness, the seeds of everything that would come to be were planted. The first flicker of light, the first breath of life. And as they stood there, watching the birth of everything, the time merchant felt a profound shift within himself, as though the boundaries between his own existence and the entire universe had melted away. But just as quickly, it passed. The scene before them morphed again, and they were standing at the edge of a great battle, watching a kingdom fall. the cries of warriors and the clash of swords filling the air. The bridge, it seemed, was not a single path through time, it was a kaleidoscope, a twisting spiral that showed glimpses of everything that had been, and everything that would be. The time merchant could feel his mind expanding, stretching to accommodate the impossible sights he was witnessing. He was no longer just a spectator, he was a part of it. A part of all of it, and then, a moment of clarity. He understood what the old man had been trying to tell him. Time was not a thing to be controlled. It was not a river to be dammed, nor a wheel to be spun. It was a web, and they were all threads within it, threads that were never truly separate, but always connected. As the bridge stretched before them, they saw the end. Not the end of time, but the end of their journey. And with that final revelation came the truth: their paths had crossed before. They had been part of the same web, the same moment, the same eternal loop. And now, together, they would return to where it all began. When the time merchant opened his eyes, he found himself back in the market square, standing before his stall. The sign, "Time for Sale," hung overhead, but it felt different now. The sounds of the market, the clinking of clocks, the chatter of customers, all felt hollow, distant. The old man was gone, and yet, the time merchant knew that his journey had not ended. It had only just begun. The knowledge he had gained on the bridge of eternity would stay with him forever. Time was not a commodity to be bought or sold. It was everything. It was all. And though the market continued around him, he knew now that he was no longer just a merchant. He was a traveler, a seeker, a part of something far greater. Time was infinite, and so was he.